Welcome,
Great.
everyone. In today's discussion, we're addressing a fundamental question. What are the moral obligations of a citizen living in a country that is going through a transition from democracy to authoritarianism? I'm here with my good friend Mariah, and he has a background as a historian and journalist and professor. And I'd like to know if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Mariah Star. I have a PhD in political science from the City University of New York. I've taught college classes in American history, world history, American politics, international relations, globalization, pretty much anything in social sciences, sociology, economics, in New York City, Boston, China. And high school classes on the subjects in Tucson, Arizona, my hometown. I have a bachelor's degree from Harvard. 25 years ago, I graduated. Um, so I'm here to address the historical parallels uh, of what we're currently experiencing in the U.S.
And my name is John Clark. I have a undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and worked in Silicon Valley as a design and development engineer. I was part of the communications build out for the internet, which would be considered the first wave. I have 3 years training toward a doctorate in clinical psychology and another year and a half toward completing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. And my question for you is to start out the discussion is what are your views like what is morality from your perspective?
Morality is simply each individual has a voice in their head called the conscience that symbolized by like the angel and the demon on my shoulders. One telling me, "Yeah, steal that loaf of bread." The other one saying, "Don't steal that loaf of bread." Um, but it's a conscience that tells me, um, first, don't tell lies, don't deceive people, and we find that in the Old Testament as well, in the Ten Commandments. And it also says, don't harm innocent people, animals, children. And if I do in fact do something bad, if I tell a lie, if I harm an innocent person, my conscience makes me feel nauseous. It gives me a sick feeling in my stomach to such an extent that I might even vomit because of it. That if I do something bad, I physically vomit. So that's where we get our sense of morality. It doesn't built into us at first, but by about the age of 7, 8, 9, varies with different people, but by about that age, we have that sense, that voice in our head. People who don't have that voice in their head, we have a word for them. We call them sociopaths. And if they do, in fact, harm innocent children and animals, or innocent adults, then we punish them. We put them on trial. If they're found guilty, we put them in jail. So we have a system for this kind of morality.
Well, it's I like the idea of that voice in your head, that understanding of right and wrong from a relatively young age, which is based on the environment we grow up in, the community that we might be connected with, family, friends, and and the idea is that we don't advance ourselves on the backs of others or bring pain into the lives of others through our actions. And I like that you bring up the innocent because it makes it real simple. Children and animals are innocents, and we don't have a right to bring harm into those populations in particular, but that extends to other people in our community, adults, the elderly, and so on.
Yeah. So every community develops its way of teaching children and making adults conform to their rules of morality. Some communities organize around the church or a set of spiritual teachings. Um, in modern Western civilization, we let teachers, parents, priests, coaches, and elders transmit this sense of morality to the children. And then when it comes to adults, we have a criminal justice system that it gives authority to police officers, investigators, district attorneys, the FBI, like we have all these authority figures who are empowered to arrest people who violate our norms. Then we try them. We have a adversarial system of prosecution and defense, and then we have a system of incarceration where they're sentenced to a certain amount of time in jail after they've been convicted by their peers, a jury, of doing these bad things. So
So we
we
have a,
translate. Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
We have a personal sense of right and wrong, and it's reinforced by a community sense of right and wrong. And we have mechanisms to deal with poor behavior for the good of the community, and it facilitates um, uh, good social relations.
Yes, and we need that. If you don't have a system in place by the community, if you don't have some enforcement mechanism for that voice in your head or sense of right and wrong, then you have a failed social contract. And that failure lets greedy, predatory people harm us and get away with it.
Right. And without accountability for predatory people and those that prey on others, our society begins to break down. It's just it's untenable. Our entire society will fail if we have evil people in charge of our social norms and our rule of law, which brings me to understand that the rule of law that we do have, for better or for worse, it's extremely important. And if there's adjustments that need to be made, which have been made over the years to it, they get made in an orderly fashion, and we don't just throw out the rule of law because that allows predators to wreak havoc on well-meaning people.
Yeah, so anyone who lives in a liberal democratic society like ours, based on the rule of law, needs to understand things like due process, social norms, um, elections, voting, the judicial system, all those things that help maintain the rule of law and a system of what's called well-ordered liberty. So I'm of the opinion, and I've published this in the past, that the American experiment in creating and upholding the rule of law through the federal government, our Constitution, that's over.
Yeah, I plan on putting a link to your article in, I believe it's Arizona Sentinel in December
The
of
Arizona
2000.
Daily Star.
Oh, sorry about that. The Arizona Daily Star. It was a December article,
Yeah,
but I think
December
it's well worth
28th, I
reading.
think.
I'm sorry, what?
December 28th, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that it's I feel like it's well worth reading and gives people some perspective, some historical perspective on how the Constitution was implemented to help guide a society into the future in a general understanding of checks and balances that didn't allow for a king or absolute power. And we've seen more recently that has continually been eroded by inaction or wrong action in important facets of the government.
Yes. So I offer three pieces of evidence that the system of government that we have under the federal constitution is illegitimate. Piece number one, the Supreme Court last year ruled that the president cannot be prosecuted for illegal actions. That the president has essentially carte blanche to do whatever he or she wants as part of their presidential powers. So the
And
Supreme
that's
Court
as
turned
long
our
as
president to a king.
they can claim that that had some connection to their official duties,
Yes,
which is a pretty broad brush.
yes. So the Supreme Court turned our presidency into a kingdom. Second, um, we have the 14th Amendment, and Section C of that 14th Amendment says any person who has instigated or participated in a rebellion or insurrection against the federal government after taking an oath of office to defend and protect the U.S. Constitution shall not be allowed to hold federal office ever again. So this amendment was written to prevent former Confederates in the Civil War from being part of the federal government after that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up too, because in our Supreme Court, Jeannie Thomas is widely considered as the Judge uh, Clarence Thomas's wife is largely considered to be one of the planners, and Judge Alioto's wife was flying the flag upside down to signify a country in trouble. These aren't actions that members of the court should be condoning or allowing so close to the seat of the Supreme Court.
Well, unfortunately, the Supreme Court does not have an ethics code. And so the 14th Amendment, Section C, does not apply to anyone in the judiciary. This amendment applies only to elected officials in the federal government.
Yeah, there has actually been one of the there's been calls to establish an ethics code for the Supreme Court because there are ethics violations, the blatant violations of ethics that any other member of any other court would be sanctioned for, if not
True, but
removed.
but but we have to remember that all those calls are within a system that is now illegitimate.
That's very true. Um,
So the moment Donald Trump, who instigated the January 6th insurrection on January 6th, 2021, the moment he was sworn in as president, that's the moment that the entire federal government became illegitimate.
what's interesting is he's actively violating due process with immigration, and yet he relied on due process to delay his trial for the insurrection until he ultimately got elected president. And
Yes,
and so and yeah, that's stealing classified information. That's a whole nother thing that was basically shoved under the table by a favorable judge that he in fact had appointed.
yes. But what we have to remember is that as of January 20th this year, the moment Donald Trump was sworn in as president is the moment the federal government became illegitimate, meaning that as citizens, we no longer owe allegiance to the United States. As ordinary citizens, we no longer have to recognize the moral authority of the U.S. Constitution. because we're in direct violation of it, and we have a moral responsibility now to change the system to a new system.
And that starts with resisting so that the system that's in place now, which is illegitimate, ultimately collapses.
Yes.
Because the ramifications of success are more than really we want to imagine. Because
Yes.
we see examples in history that they're devastating.
So the first thing we have to do as citizens is meet our moral obligation, and that's to recognize that the federal government under President Donald Trump is now evil.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that is through continuous ignoring due process and deceiving the public. And
Yes.
that it's constant, and it wears a person out to just to keep track of all the terrible things that are being inflicted upon different populations, choosing the weakest people first, immigrants and other people, older people that can't defend themselves, to oppress first.
Yes.
And if we allow that success, we're on a pretty ugly slippery slope into authoritarianism, which anybody that supports that direction is by definition evil. If I understand your thoughts on the matter correctly.
Well, what we have to remember is that evil and good are easy to understand. It's a framework that the West has adopted for the past 3,000 straight years. And the Judeo Christian framework we've inherited from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and then onto Christianity and Islam. The devil in the Old Testament deceives Adam and Eve into eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's that original deception that characterizes the devil. Okay, so deception is what Trump does all the time. Trump is a con artist, so he fits that part of the definition of evil. But then when you look at the ethic of do no harm to the innocent, well, all Trump was a con man back in 2015 who ran for the presidency to promote his name. That's fine.
In
But
the
as president,
1980s, in the 1980s, when I first became aware of him, I thought this guy's a con man.
yeah,
I immediately didn't like him because he seemed to do whatever he felt like, no matter what kind of damage he was being done. And he's pretty much known by those who pay attention as a terrible businessman. He's failed in virtually every business that he ever started, and he's refused to pay people after getting them to do work. The person he cares about is himself, and yet he's got enablers that are close enough to power that they hope to be able to share in some of that power that he's taken for himself.
yes. So Trump is a con artist and a sociopath. He has no problem harming innocent people. And he's got a track record of harming innocent women as a sexual predator.
Yeah, yeah, it's there's a number of people out there that are speaking on the topic that really feel like cruelty is the point. And when somebody witnesses that kind of cruelty, it can almost freeze you in place and and put you in a flight or fight response where your your uh, your sense of what to do is annihilated because you're being hit on all sides. And if you get angry, it completely wears you out. It's exhausting. And so the point is to exhaust his opposition, to do so many things in so many different dimensions that are so cruel, the opposition literally loses the energy to resist.
Yes, so that's why we're meeting now, because we recognize the burden being placed on concerned citizens who want to meet their moral obligation, do not want to be passive observers, but know that they cannot sustain the stamina to consistently be active participants as political activists.
Right. They're they're um, they're like what you describe as the moderates. Is they can devote some of their time in various ways to resisting, but the point is that is to resist in all kinds of different ways. And there are activists that actually have currently formed a number of very good organizations that have a decentralized approach, and they mobilize toward protests of various kinds. And the idea is that the is to inform and also affect, let's say, businesses, whether it's Tesla or other people who have tried to court favor with Donald Trump, by oligarchs in particular, by placating them. And as Amazon's finding out, as Google's finding out, as other organizations are finding out, he's not lifting a finger to do anything in their favor, and unless he feels it's directly beneficial to him.
Yeah, so we have to explain this to the average person watching us right now. Once you accept that you have a moral duty as a citizen to resist authoritarianism, then you have to place yourself in one of the three categories of citizen activity. So the first category of the active citizen, I call that the radical. That is about 5 or 10% of a society. That's the person who dedicates their entire life to fighting the good fight. They don't have a career, a normal career. They don't have a family. Or if they do have a family, the family supports their radical activities. So all their life is about fighting the good fight in whatever form.
I have a family member whose mother in the South in Mississippi was part of the activist. She was an activist in the 60s and 70s and traveled all over the country, um, to protest and try to create social change. And she's a black woman, and so certainly there was a lot of change necessary and needed at that time.
Yeah. So most citizens fall into the moderate category. A moderate has a career and a family. They probably support the issues you care about because most human beings are compassionate and empathetic and they do care about social justice, but they're not willing to organize their entire life around it. So, in order to affect the moderate, the radical activist needs to give the moderate an on ramp into social justice issues. So, you need to respect the spare time that a moderate has and like give them a day on the weekend to become part of an activist assembly or protest movement of some kind.
And I'll provide links to a few organizations that are actually providing that on ramp for people. And one of the things one activist was saying that I think is very important is that we're not trying to make a protest, every protest bigger than the last protest. We're trying to keep a constant stream of pressure on the authoritarian desires of the government at this point.
Yeah, and that pressure is important. So the last part of the category, so we've got the radicals, we've got the moderates. Last part is the bystanders. And the bystander doesn't actually even care about the issues that the moderates and radicals care about. They just want to go about their daily lives. But if the radicals can organize the moderates to engage in, let's say, a sit-in at a restaurant, or lying down in the streets in a commercial section and blocking traffic, or lying down on railroads and blocking trains from delivering supplies, the lives of the bystanders can be affected and force the bystanders to pay attention, at least temporarily, to the issues that the radicals care about. So this is where civil disobedience comes in.
Right. There's been discussions recently about a general strike, work slowdown. There are a number of mechanisms that our society has learned over the years from protests that started with, let's say, the civil rights movement and Jim Crow, as you mentioned, being a personification of evil. That we've learned ways to be effective and create social change where it may not have seemed possible initially.
Yeah, so as a political scientist and historian, I'm not really trained in discussing good and evil. Theology is where evil comes in. But we have to acknowledge that the civil rights movement was about ending Jim Crow, and Jim Crow was a form of institutionalized evil. Just as slavery before the Civil War was a form of institutionalized evil. So, like, okay, evil. We've already said it's about deception and causing harm to someone. Well, if you think of the gifts of God, they're articulated in our Declaration of Independence and by John Locke. So John Locke came first, and John Locke said, "We're endowed by our Creator with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of property." Jefferson turned the property part into the pursuit of happiness. But basically, you talk to any person and they will agree. We have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So God gave us free will as one of the fundamental gifts as sentient beings. So slavery took away free will and liberty from the slaves. Jim Crow took away liberty from the black people who suffer under Jim Crow. So today we have we have the capacity to see the government act in evil ways by arresting people and depriving them of liberty. Like the guy who was just arrested and sent to the El Salvadorian prison. That was evil right there. It was an administrative error, but that demonstrates not just the incompetence of the government, but the evil actions of our government.
Right, and a judge was recently arrested in her courtroom for what the government says is uh, aiding and abetting an immigrant that was wanted, um, and this is in Wisconsin, and when you look at the situation, they came in with an administrative warrant, which if somebody came to your door with an administrative warrant, you could tell them to go away. You don't have to answer any questions. And so it's a power play. And yet when you listen to the attorney general, when you listen to other people that are that are part of the administration, they're actually painting it as completely different. And in fact, they arrested her, but however, she's not indicted for anything. It's a criminal complaint. It has to be raised to the level of indictment, and it's unlikely that you can find a grand jury anywhere that would do that. And so ultimately, it's to send a message to other people, other judges that they will be arrested if they don't follow along. And the interesting part of that is that what people are saying about authoritarianism and its power is that don't do something beforehand to try to avoid scrutiny. The people are conforming before they're being required to. And that's what these power plays are designed to do, is to promote conformance and into what they want, when in fact what we need to do is in every single turn be resistant, make them do what they think they have to do to continue to be successful. And what we're seeing now is that the Trump is less popular than any president in the last 80 years, literally since World War II. And so the people that are objecting to what's going on are in the majority by a large margin, and it's going to continue to increase. We haven't even gotten to the point where we're going to see empty store shelves. So, so, but when we can, I'd like to say a little bit more about evil, because you can get somebody to commit acts of evil, not everybody, but somebody, by taking responsibility for their actions, saying, I got this, you do what I'm asking you to do, and you're part of the group. And you in your classes have demonstrated just how powerful wanting to be part of the majority is. And so the idea is that we have to take personal responsibility for our actions and understand the nature of our morality, through introspection.
Yes, introspection is key because by engaging in introspection, we can see our motivations and where our thoughts come from and the foundation of our emotions and our role in our communities. And the end result of that process is the ability to see your moral obligations as a result.
There's something I have felt for a long time, and that is that governments use well-meaning people to occupy their time to support and save people that they're oppressing or bringing harm to, like let's say the elderly, or people that don't have enough food. There's enormous amount of effort that goes on in society to keep these people from literally dying, and that works into an oppressive government's favor. We still have to maintain those activities, but we have to keep our energy up, so that we can understand the nature of our actions, what we're doing, and why we're doing it, and have personal responsibility for what we're doing. We can't hand off that responsibility to anybody else.
Yes. So what we're really talking about is how to maintain both our autonomy as rational thinking individuals and our interdependence as members of vibrant communities.
So I would actually like to draw attention to the subject of your thesis, for your PhD, because we've talked about it before. You examined atrocities throughout history to understand the nature of change agents if I understand correctly, and you had to find a way to engage with really terrible stuff without actually losing your intellectual ability to characterize these events and come up with a useful understanding of what's happened throughout history, things that prompt uprisings or things that change a politician's career. They might have an experience of visiting starving children, and suddenly their entire political focus is different through that experience. And um, so, what I'm suggesting is, I think that you have a lot of insight to maintaining some sort of analytic stability in the face of something of things that are highly charged emotionally.
Thank you for that. I found at least two good ways to maintain emotional stability. One is to create an what's called analytic distance from the problem by placing it into historical context. So, as a historian and political scientist, I follow a rule. History, what happened, whether it was 5 years ago, 25 years ago, 500 years ago, is a neutral topic. I must not allow myself to get angry or upset or even happy about a historical event. It's simply what happened in the past. If I'm going to have an emotional reaction to something, that thing must be in the present, not in the past.
Which actually is interesting because if I extend on what you say right there, something that happened yesterday is in the past. It may
Yeah.
be affecting you today, but however, you can feel things in the present about something that's currently happening, but as it slips into the past, whether it's a day or a week or a year, there has to be some separation emotionally because it is in effect part of history.
Yeah, I mean, look, what happened 5 minutes ago is in the past as well.
Right,
So the present moment is here and now. And so I can have a physical reaction to what's happening right now. And being in that present moment, allow my body, we started off with like talking about good and evil. Evil is that voice in your head that directs your actions right now.
right,
And if you do something that's bad, your body has a physiological response to that. You feel nauseous.
right.
So that you cannot turn that physiological response off. That's healthy to have it active in this moment.
Right. And it's important, I think, at least my perspective is that we have arrived at this moment through a trajectory that it's literally the trajectory of our lives. We have to understand where we've been and how we've arrived at this moment so that we can have a sense of the actual emotional experience that we're currently having and a reaction to it and that trajectory into the present moment is what helps us understand what our trajectory is going forward and it's in the present moment that we make those decisions to change that trajectory if in fact actually what is happening or where we think we're going to end up is not where we should be.
Yeah. So this is the reason why I'm comfortable doing these videos with you now, because we're in the exact moment where we as human beings need to have an intelligent, effective response to the shift in our country toward authoritarianism And we also need to build alliances with our friends and neighbors and extended community as a way to protect ourselves from the exhaustion that comes from moral outrage.
Right. And it is exhausting to be outraged. It might derive action to an extent, but it wears you down to where you're numb to acting at some point. You just can't keep raising that kind of moral outrage all the time. We're
Yes, you're right.
we're in a situation that is morally outrageous, and nothing like any of us were brought up to understand that our society was going to uh, um, evolve into. And so now, at this point in history, which I consider an inflection point, we all have an opportunity to literally make history together in events that we may be looking at in 200 years later.
Yes. And so this is why we need to process what's happening now with a model. So I was able to both treat events as stuff that happened in the past and create a model for how to best respond to it. So it's that modeling of information that gives us intellectual discipline. It's that discipline through the mind that I've mastered, and it's discipline through the body and the spirit that you've mastered. And with all three disciplines combined, I think any citizen can develop the stamina to engage in active social justice.
Well, I absolutely agree, and it is really a mind, body, and spirit engagement, because your mind having an analytic understanding of what you're facing and how it's affecting you and how it relates to your, excuse me, moral compass. um, that's very important. As far as strengthening that internal sense, there are all kinds of techniques, whether it's meditation or taking walks, contemplation. There are a number of ways to actually regenerate and refresh your body, even to the point of getting enough sleep and eating properly. um, they all have an effect on the psychology or the psyche of an individual that's very powerful. And right now, we need to preserve our energy for the actions that are going to make a difference. And I think that, as you had mentioned, collective action helps people share that energy across a group of people with a shared goal. And there are plenty of examples of how sharing that difficulty with a group is very effective as far as maintaining your own sense of internal stability.
Yes. So the fundamentals of mental discipline include three words that I've used for the past 35 years essentially. You have to have energy, you have to have focus, and you need stamina. So the energy must come from somewhere. Exercise, reading a good book, um, watching good comedy, whatever it is. You have to get energy from somewhere.
And I suspect that everybody that's listening knows how they replenish themselves, how they get energy, and like you say, reading a good book, exercise. But okay, so the energy part of it, I think people know what replenishes them.
Yes. Okay, the focus part though. That's a problem in our society because very few people know how to focus. They get distracted by social media, online games, or phone games. Um, they get distracted by cable news shows and all the different things that the government is doing. So we need to help people turn that off.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard for me because I actually, as a Silicon Valley engineer, made those devices possible. I didn't make the devices themselves. I created the infrastructure that allowed that type of communication. And so I never engaged with a computer or a cell phone for the fun part of it that you see so many people engage with. It's always been, more of a business thing to me. However, that's not the experience of the majority of the population now.
Yes. So that's why you and I are talking about this because it's easy for an authoritarian regime to take over if we are all distracted by these devices and we're not paying attention to what's happening right in front of our faces in a neighborhood. So once you turn the devices off, turn your connections to your community on.
Yeah, and I don't think we're suggesting that you leave your cell phone home. You put it in your pocket and take it out when it's necessary to take it out, not as a matter of course, just like you might flip the TV on when you get home.
Yeah, so we're talking about habits here.
Right.
And what we're saying to anyone watching this video is thank you for watching this video. Um, but after you watch this video, turn off your phone or turn off your laptop and go and talk to someone. Don't just go to the next video.
Right. Right.
So mental discipline is all about having a stopping point for your mind.
And that allows you to bring up focus and identify those areas that are important to in which to apply that focus, which we're suggesting right now, is to help save a way of government that looks like it's fast going away. In
Yes.
in literally less than 100 days, there has been an enormous amount of destruction. We're a couple of
Yes.
days away from day 100, and there's some people think it may take decades to repair it. My personal feeling is that we're going to probably see a dissolution of our current form of government in favor of a new constitution. Something that you had mentioned employing in your article, employing Article 5 and working to pass some amendments. The first of which would be to remove the king designation from the president.
Yes. So the if you're going to turn off this video on your phone or laptop and go talk to someone, go talk to your state representative and senator and urge them to vote for an Article 5 resolution that would trigger another constitutional convention. So if we acknowledge and recognize that our current system is no longer legitimate, then we need a new system. And the only way to create that new system is through a convention of states.
Well, I actually liked your idea that you presented in the article as potentially dissolving the Senate and massively increasing the number of representatives in the House. The
Yeah.
Senate, to me, is inherently undemocratic because you have in California two senators that represent like 46 million people, and in Wyoming, you have two senators with the same amount of power that represent about a half million people. And that kind of imbalance is literally what's allowed this fascist party to take over the government. They concentrated on the areas where they could strike fear into people who see their way of life disappearing, and have an immense mistrust of the urban coasts of the United States.
Yes. So if we're going to abolish the Senate, we need to have a reason for that. And that's why we have to revisit the Federalist Papers, which were written by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison in support of our current Constitution. And the entire premise of our current Constitution is to prevent the uneducated mobs, the people, from having too much power. So a lot has changed in the past 250 years since 1776. And one of the things that probably has changed is the composition of the ordinary person. They're much more educated now. So maybe
Well,
we don't have to fear the ordinary person as the uneducated mob anymore.
right. Even in the 1920s, I think it was Walter Whitman that was referring to the unwashed masses, um, that really shouldn't have a vote. And I agree with you. We have a different citizen these days who's much more well informed, and there are a lot of efforts to disenfranchise informed people in favor of people that can be manipulated into voting even against their own interests.
Yes. Um, but all of this is discussion for what happens after the current administration leaves and after our current government changes, which I think is worthwhile, but is best left for another video.
Yeah, I agree with that. Our the main thrust of this was to describe the problem, discuss morality, and reach those moderates who want to do something, and give them some tools to keep from getting worn out through the moral outrage that would be natural, from well-meaning people.
Yes, I agree. So if you're one of those moderates watching this video, hopefully you receive the message that you need to engage in a lot of self-care these days to maintain the stamina of your political activism.
Yeah, well, we'll have to discuss how frequent we should make these videos, but once we get on a bit of a roll, it seems like maybe once a week or once every other week, we could delve in a little bit more detail in some of these topics, that are important to address, more thoroughly.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's good for this video. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and thank you for coming. It's awesome. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody, or good day, everybody, whenever you're
Yeah, good
watching.
day, everybody, depending on where you're watching this.